Hey guys, this is Mrs. Garth for Algebra 1 TARS. Today we are going to go over factor by grouping. So we did this maybe in March. It's something that if you need the review, I'm going to do 4 problems for you. And then I've also uploaded the notes so that you have the notes, you can download them. It gives you step-by-step instructions and you'll be able to see what we're working on. If I go too fast, make sure that you know that you can pause it at any time. So sometimes I write a little fast. Make sure you pause so that you can catch up. This will all be online, all available to you. So today, factor by grouping is the first thing that we're going to do. And we are in your notes, I have x cubed plus 4x squared minus 8x minus 32. Okay. So the first thing we do is we determine if there's a greatest common factor in each term. So 4 terms, I would have to have the same number or or be able to take out a variable in each term. So let's look at numbers first. I have 1, 4, 8, and 32. 1 is a prime number, which means that I can't take any number out. Variables, I do not have an x in every single term because the 32 does not have an x, which means that I cannot greatest common factor this. Now, because there are 4 terms, we are going to factor by grouping. Factor by grouping is something we're going to do for maybe the rest of the year, so it's something that we really need to understand how to do. We're going to use greatest common factor to be able to do this. So if you do not know how to greatest common factor, you need to go to the greatest common factor video and learn that. I've shown you 4 problems. I've also uploaded other problems for you to work on so that you know how to do this. I am not going to go through writing down every single term and finding the greatest common factor. What I am going to do is show you what these steps include. So you know how to greatest common factor. You've already been doing that. When you get to this video, you should already know how to do it. We are moving on to factor by grouping. So on our notes, it says the second thing that we do after we check to see if I have a greatest common factor, which I do not, is that we are going to put parentheses around the first 2 terms. And then I'm also going to put parentheses around the second 2 terms. I'm going to write these in blue and red. Lost my blue marker, sorry. So we are going to greatest common factor our first 2 terms. The first thing I'm going to look at is number. Do I have a number that I can take out of both 1 and 4? Well, since 1 is a prime number, it's 1 times 1, then that means the only number that I can take out is the number 1. Now let's look at how many variables I can take out. I have 3 x's here and 2 x's there, which means that I can only take out an x squared. If you need to, I find that everybody is for the most part able to use the factor sheet to be able to see the numbers that they need to take out, but not always able to see the variables. So I wrote 3 x's above my x cubed. I wrote 2 x's above my x squared. Notice I have 2 x's that I can take out of both of those. So that's why this is 1x squared that's coming outside of our parentheses. Now, I'm going to start my parentheses. I have 2 terms inside my parentheses, which means I have to have 2 terms on the inside for my greatest common factor. I have x squared on the outside. I took 2 x's out, which means I only have 1 x left. This is a plus, so I'm adding a plus. 4 divided by 1 is 4. And I took 2 x's out. They're both circled, which means I do not have any variables left. The fourth thing that it says for us to do is to greatest common factor our next 2 terms. Now, notice that I have this subtraction sign inside of the parentheses, which means that it has to be a negative number that I'm taking out. So, what number can I take out of both 8 and 32? If I looked at my factor sheet, I would see that 8 is the largest number that goes into both 8 and 32. I have one x here, but I do not have any x's for my 32, which means I can't take any out. So I'm going to start my parentheses. I have a negative 8x divided by a negative 8x. A negative divided by a negative is a positive 1. I'm going to put my 1 there too. And I did not take any x's out for my greatest common factor, so it's still x. Now, negative 32 divided by negative 8, a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so it's a plus 4. Now, here's how you know if you did it correctly. If everything inside my parentheses is exactly the same, then we did it correctly. So I have 1x plus 4 here, 1x plus 4 there, which means we did it right. So I'm going to rewrite 1x plus 4. What is 1x plus 4 being multiplied by? 1x plus 4 is being multiplied by a 1x squared there. And it's being multiplied by a negative 8 here. So this is my final answer. 1x plus 4 times 1x squared minus 8. Now, let's move on to example 2. I have a 2x cubed minus 6x squared minus 3x plus 9. The first thing that it tells us to do is look for greatest common factor. Is there a number that I can divide out of each of these numbers? Well, here's the thing. 2 is a prime number, can only be divided by itself or 1. And 3 is a prime number, can only be divided by itself or 1. Since I have 2 prime numbers, I know that there's not a greatest common factor for me to pull out, which means that then I have to look and see, do I have 4 terms? 1, 2, 3, 4? I do. So I can factor by grouping. So step 2 tells us to put parentheses around the first 2 terms, and then put parentheses around the second 2 terms. Once we've done that, we're going to greatest common factor, our first 2 terms, and then we're going to greatest common factor, our second 2 terms. So our first 2 terms, what number can I pull out of 2 and 6? If I looked at my factor sheet, I would see that 2 is the highest factor of both 2 and 6. Now, I, again, find that you guys have a hard time figuring out how many variables we can take out, so I'm just going to write them up here. I've just written how many x's I have in each term. I have x cubed, which means I have 3 of them. I put that up here. X squared, I have 2 of them. And x, I just have 1. So how many x's can I take out? Well, how many do I have in common? I have 2 x's in common. So that means it's going to be an x squared. So I have taken out my number and my variable, which means I'm going to start my parentheses. I have 2 terms inside my parentheses, which means I'm going to need 2 terms inside my parentheses here. 2 divided by 2 is 1. I took 2 x's out, and I have 1 x left. A minus 6 divided by 2 is 3. I had 2 x's, and I took 2 x's out, which means that I don't have any more inside my parentheses. Now, I have a minus sign in front of this 3, which means this is going to be minus. I'm going to figure out the highest factor between 3 and 9. And if I look at my factor sheet, that's going to be a 3. I do not have an x in both terms, which means I cannot take a variable out. So I'm going to start my parentheses. I have 2 terms, which means I need 2 terms inside my parentheses. -3 divided by -3. Remember, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So it's 1. And I have an x left. +9 divided by a -3 is going to give me a negative number. +9 divided by -3 is a -3. All right, so do my parentheses look the same? Are they the same? They sure are, which means that I did it correctly. So I have 1x minus 3. 1x minus 3 here is being multiplied by the 2x squared. 1x minus 3 here is being multiplied by the -3. That's my answer. We're done. So let's move on. I've got 2 extra practice problems for you. I'm going to do those. If you know what you're doing, I want you to stop the video and I want you to practice this on your own and make sure you get the correct answer. If you don't know what you're doing, that's okay. We're going to keep going. You're able to keep watching, see if you know how to do it on your own, and then I've got extra practice for you to work on that's uploaded to the site. So let's look at extra practice problem number 1, where I have a cubed plus 2a squared plus a 9a plus 18. So first thing we do, greatest common factor. Is there a number that goes into 1, 2, 9, and 18? Well, 1 can only be divided by itself, so there is no number that can go into both of those. The other thing that I'm going to do before we even start is I'm going to write my variables up above, where I have 3 A's, 2 A's, and 1 A, just so that we can see what we're using. Now, the next thing we do is we put parentheses around our first 2 terms and our second 2 terms. So I am looking, what number goes into 1 and 2? It's just a 1. And then I have 2 A's here and 2 A's there. So I can take out 2 A's or A squared. Since I've dealt with both the number and the variable, I can move on to my parentheses. 1 divided by 1 is a 1. I had 3 A's and I took 2 out. So you can see that there's 1 left over. Plus, because of our plus sign, 2 divided by 1 is going to be 2. And I had 2 A's, but I took 2 of them out. So I don't have any left. Now, let's look at our 9. So this plus means I'm doing a plus. The greatest common factor between 9 and 18 is 9. I have an A in my 9A term, but I do not in my 18, which means I cannot take a variable out, so I'm going to start my parentheses. I have 2 terms inside my parentheses, which means I'm going to need 2 terms. So 9 divided by 9 is 1. I have an A left, plus a positive 18 divided by a positive 9 is going to be a positive 2. So, do the 2 inside of my parentheses look the same? Because if they do, then I did it correctly. I have a 1A plus 2 and a 1A plus 2. That means we did it correctly. So, 1A plus 2. This 1A plus 2 is being multiplied by 1A squared. And this 1A plus 2 is being multiplied by 9. And that's our answer. 1A plus 2 times 1A squared plus 9. Remember, 1A is the same as just A. If you don't see a number in front, then it's just a 1. You can write it there or not. Both are correct. We have one more to work on, and then you will work on the worksheet that I have uploaded to make sure that you know what you're doing. So our last one is w cubed plus 5w minus 8w minus 40. All right, so number 1, greatest common factor. Is there a number that goes into 1, 5, 8, and 40? Since I just have a 1, then we know that the answer is no. So then that tells us to put parentheses around the first 2 terms and the second 2 terms. So parentheses around the first 2 terms. And parentheses around the second 2 terms. We're going to greatest common factor the first 2 terms. So what number goes into both 1 and 5? It's just going to be a 1. Oh, I forgot to write my W's. Just so we can see. Now, how many W's can I take out? I have 2 W's here and 2 W's here, which means that I can take out 2 W's. So 2 W's is a W squared. I've dealt with both the number and the variable, which means now it's time for us to do our parentheses. For my 1W cubed, 1 divided by 1 is a 1. I had 3 W's and I took 2 out. You can see that there's 1 left that was not circled.
Your 5W needs a square next to it.
Oh, thank you. I was just reminded that my 5W needs a squared next to it. So I have a plus. 5 divided by 1 is going to be a 5. I had 2 W's. I took 2 W's out, which means that I don't have any more left that aren't circled. So I end my parentheses. Now, my subtraction sign there means I'm minus. 8 and 40, my greatest number that can go into both 8 and 40 is 8. I don't have a W in both terms. I don't have a variable in both terms, so I cannot take 1 out. That means I start my parentheses. Negative 8 divided by negative 8 is 1. I have 1 W left that wasn't circled. Negative 40 divided by negative 8 is going to be a positive 5. Remember, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So now, do my parentheses match? 1W plus 5, 1W plus 5. They sure do. That means that I did it correctly. So my terms are 1W plus 5. My 1W plus 5 is being multiplied by a 1W squared. And over here, this 1W plus 5 is being multiplied by a negative 8. So our answer is 1W plus 5 times 1W squared minus 8. And that's our answer. Please check and make sure that you do the work to make sure you know what you're doing, because this is going to go into our next lesson of factoring trinomials.